But you hear people say, look at that old person. I've said it. And I know there's people out there pointing to me and say, look at that old guy. But what is old? It could be a frame of mind. But you also heard us say age is just a number. Age is just a number. But it's also about aches and pains and losing hair, losing teeth, losing your memory. I mean, it all comes with it, doesn't it? It's all part of it. Our elders, that is, those that are older than we are, one thing we need to remember, if nothing else, they deserve our respect. They deserve our respect because they've went ahead of us. They've been through it. Respecting our elders demonstrates our obedience to God. If you look at Leviticus chapter 19, verse 32, rise in the presence of the aged. Show respect for the elderly and revere your God. I am the Lord. You see, in Old Testament times and even through New Testament times, the elderly held a special place in society, in the family, because God said they were special. God said they deserve respect. Why? Because age brings experience. It doesn't matter how busy you've been throughout your life, you've experienced something, have you not? You have went through something that you can help other people with. You know, we've all had good and bad experiences in our lives. But the key is learning from that experience, no matter what. One thing I have found in our society today, a lot of kids don't revere their grandparents like they did when I was a kid. I mean, it was special to be able to have my grandfather sit down and talk with me, to show me something, to let me go out into the hayfield and work with him. That was special. I don't think it's like that anymore so much with most kids because they're old. They're out of it. They don't understand. But they're a wealth of experience that can help you grow. As we age, I should say, we are tasked with being an example to those who are younger. That's always been God's plan. As Paul writes to Titus in Titus chapter 2 and verses 2 and 3, it says, teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled and sound in faith, in love and endurance. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live and not to be slanderers, addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. As we get older, we're supposed to learn and understand how to act so that we live a life that's worthy of respect. So that those around us can look up to us and see an example of Christ in our lives. To see us living in such a way that our light is shining. And hopefully, age means wisdom. We hope. We hope we learn from our life before. There was a grandfather that was talking to his teenage grandson, and he said, you know, after you think you know it all, you discover that friends are more important than accolades or public recognition. Then after you think you know it all, you discover that family is more important than being right all the time. After you think you know it all, faith becomes the most important thing. Then you discover that life is short. He went on to say wisdom is defined in this way. You learn most things after you think you know it all. So true. So true. I mean, you've probably seen the t-shirts or the bumper stickers that says, teenagers, quick, get out of the house and do things your way while you know it all. Because sometimes that's the way it feels. Oh, mom and dad don't know anything. Grandma and grandpa don't know anything. Friends, we can all learn from those who went before us, and we'll teach those who follow. That's why it's important we set the good example. That's why it's important we hold to the faith. If we don't think it matters, where will the church end up in 30 years? In 40 years? You see, we see the example from this in the Old Testament. When Israel was carried off into captivity, they couldn't worship the way they were supposed to. When Nehemiah goes back to build the walls at Jerusalem, and after it's done, and Ezra gets up to read the book of the law, he's reading the book of the law with all of people there in Jerusalem listening, and all of a sudden they stop him. They said, "Stop, we're not doing these things that the book of the law says we should be doing." Well, why not? Because they'd been in captivity for a generation and they weren't taught. And they said, "We want to do it right. We want to get back on path." And so, friends, when we start drifting away, that's what people learn, isn't it? Well, if that's the way mom and dad done it, that's good enough for me. So we want to do it right. We're tasked with that responsibility of being an example. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 1 says, "A wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker does not listen to rebuke." Have you ever not listened to rebuke? I think we can all go, yes, we have. Because we don't like to be rebuked. But when we're rebuked by a wise person, we need to listen and pay attention. So, we must be examples of faith. Being an example of faith. What does that mean? Well, let me ask you. Is your life worthy of imitation? I mean, can you look in the mirror in the morning and say, "I'm not leading people astray. My life displays my love for God"? Sometimes that's hard, isn't it? Sometimes we react to things and it's just a reaction. It's not the way that we are, but it's just a reaction. Maybe we get very angry at someone for something that they did that was really silly. We don't usually act that way. But yet, it may be the only example that some people ever see of our life. We have to learn to control. We have to make it worthy of imitation. Think about it this way. You ever see anybody walking around with an athletic jersey on that had somebody's name on the back of it? If Christians did that and had that, would anybody want to wear your jersey? Would you be that kind of influence and example to people? Remember Titus 2 and 3, live a life worthy of respect. And it takes a conscious effort. It's like we was talking about in class this morning. Why do we sin? I mean, simply put, as Christians, we know sin is wrong, right? We know it's wrong to sin. So why do we do it? Why do we do it if we know that it's wrong? Yeah? It's fun. It's easy because, who's going to resist it? But we got to live that life that's worthy of imitation. Make the effort. Think about the way that we live. Paul put it this way, 1 Corinthians 11:1, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. So follow me as I follow Christ. Don't do everything I do, because frankly, sometimes I don't do things right. Sometimes I don't act the way I should. I was proud of myself during the football game yesterday. I yelled at the TV once. Just once. I learned a long time ago, I'm a passionate sports fan and I used to get excited. But I learned several years back, it don't matter. My life's going to go on. Yeah, I'm going to take a ribbing here and there. Being from Ohio, and people who love the Buckeyes, my wife, she don't poke fun at me, but many do. But I sat and thinking here a while back, I thought, when I was growing up in Ohio, I don't think there are as many Ohio State fans as there are now. Why is that? Because it's easy to cheer for a winner. It takes a true fan, and with all apologies to Jack, it takes a true fan to be a Cleveland sports fan, and I'm that too. Why? It's a conscious decision I make. Now, am I telling you I'm setting the example to be a Cleveland sports fan? No, that's your choice. But what I'm saying is when we make decisions to do something, we stick with it, especially when it's right, no matter what anybody else says. So we want to follow the example of Christ. Here's a question. Who do you admire most? Well, as Christians, that's easy, isn't it? Who do you admire most? Well, Jesus. But what I mean, is there anybody who you look at and say, I want to be like them? Tammy and I have been involved in several different congregations, and I can pick somebody out in every congregation that I used to watch. That I used to say, man, I like the way they, and you fill in the blank, in displaying their faith. I wish I could do that. I wish I could be like that. Well, you know what? You can. Now, I'm not telling you to be exactly like somebody else, but you can pull the traits you see out of your fellow Christians and say, I want that in my life. It goes back to what Paul said, following their example as they follow Christ. And so we do that. I know we've all been influenced by someone older and someone younger. It deepens our faith. We all should strive to be worthy of imitation. Paul said in writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young. He was writing to Timothy as a young preacher, but set an example for the believers in speech, in life, in love, in faith, and in purity. He's telling Timothy, yeah, you're young, and I don't have that problem anymore, but when you're a young preacher, sometimes it's tough to walk into a congregation and be taken seriously. Sometimes. And Paul knew Timothy was going to struggle with that. So he said, don't let anybody say, well, you're just a young man. You don't know what you're talking about. He said, you just go in and you set your example by the way that you talk, by the way that you live. Set that example in unconditional love. Display your faith in all things and keep yourself pure. Nobody can look down on you when you do that. Nobody. And nobody can accuse you of being green. Friends, we know that the faith bar is set very high. I mean, we wear the name Christian. What does Christian mean? Literally, it means follower of Christ or Christ-like. So if we're following Jesus, we want to be like Jesus, boy, that bar it's out of sight, isn't it? When it comes to faith. It's set really high. And even Paul, in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 5 says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. And that's something we got to work on every day. Keeping that attitude. I mean, when Paul wrote to the Romans in chapter 12, he said, you've got to renew your minds. And that's a daily thing because our minds are bombarded with sinful things and things that aren't exactly what God wants us to live like. Every day we see it. And it's getting worse. In our society today, we live in a society where, hey, if you think it's good for you, then we'll accept it. Don't we? And that's not what God says. God says, here is what I want you to do. Here's how I want you to live. There are absolute rights, there are absolute wrongs, and there are absolute morals. But when we live in a world that says, no, really, there's not, it does make things a little tougher. It does make things a little tougher to have the attitude of Jesus. But think about the attitude that Jesus had. Where did it come from? How did he have that attitude? Jesus had unconditional love. When we have unconditional love, it doesn't mean that we accept all that goes on. We accept that person because they're created in the image of God. God desires that that person be saved. But it doesn't mean we condone everything that that person does. I mean, we've got to put others first. We have to offer grace. We have to offer mercy. We have to offer forgiveness. We have to offer love. Never having our own agenda, but always pleasing God. Piece of cake, isn't it? Isn't it? That's why this is a growth. That's why this is a journey that we take to become like Jesus. I mean, it would be wonderful if once we come up out of the waters of baptism, we didn't have to worry about sin. We didn't have to worry about anything. But that's not the way God designed it. See, God designed us with the ability to think, the ability to make choices. And so we have to choose to set our faith bar really high, to be up there like Jesus. And finally, our faith must be ours. It has to belong to us. Your faith does me no good. My faith does you no good. Even in families. The family's faith is no good if you don't take part in it. We can't think about salvation just because we go to the right church. And there's people that think that way. It's individual. It's all about your relationship with God. And it's our decision. I mean, it may start out when you're young, if your parents are Christians, it may start out their decision. You're going to church. You're going to Bible class. They're putting you in the atmosphere to give you the facts. Nobody can enter heaven on anyone else's coattails. Can't be done. It's all about you and God. It's all about that individual relationship. Now, God desires that all men be saved, but He leaves the decision up to each individual. You know, isn't it amazing that God loves us so much that He leaves the one decision that's going to affect every individual for eternity up to that individual? I mean, how many times do you hear people tell young people or people getting married, this is the biggest decision in your life? No, it's not. Where they're going to go to college, this is the biggest decision in your life. No, it's not. What are you going to do with Jesus? This is the biggest decision in your life. Why? Because that's the only one that carries on to eternity. That's the only one that follows you forever and ever. But God desires all men be saved. And in Jesus' instructions to the disciples in the Great Commission in Mark 16:16, He says, whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. So you hear the words, you have the choice. You have the choice. And sometimes as Christians it gets so discouraging when we present the truth to someone and we get them to the verge of baptism and they say, no thank you. I don't think I'm interested. It hurts. But friends, God says it's their choice. They choose. Many have gone on before us doing this and trying to take care of us. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 speaks of all the faith heroes. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Hebrews chapter 11 is often referred to as the Faith Hall of Fame. There's been countless examples given to us to help us make an educated choice. The Hebrew writer in Hebrews 11 lists some of those heroes of the faith that we know about. Noah, Moses, Abraham, Rahab, excuse me. And then goes on to say, I don't even have time to tell you about a lot of the prophets. I don't have time to tell you about David. I don't have time to tell you about all these other people. But they stood for the faith. And so when he flips the page, he says, therefore, because of what they've done, because we are surrounded by their witness, let us follow their example. Let us throw off all that stuff that entangles us, the sin, everything that hinders us, so that we can run the race with perseverance because they did. They did. And so we must seek God through faith. We have to seek God. Hebrews 11:6 says, and without faith it's impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. Some versions say diligently seek Him. That means put a lot of effort into it. You see,